Well, good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. And this is really an interesting time in which we are living. I think we can all be grateful for what we have. What I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you a story. It's the story of the sands. And once upon a time, there was this beautiful river. And it was gaily living its life, running through hills and dales, and just traversing the landscape. And one day it came to the edge of the desert. And all of a sudden, it couldn't run, it couldn't flow as it usually did, as the desert started to gobble up the river. So the river, of course, was in great consternation and said, "Oh my, what'll I do? I'm a river, and my job in life is to traverse the landscape, to travel over hill and dale, through the land, and just be a river. And now I am stopped. I'm at the edge of the desert. What will I do?" And the desert spoke to the river and said, "There is only one thing that you can do at this point, and that is talk to the wind. And maybe the wind can help you." And the desert said, "Oh my goodness, how will the wind help me? But let me try, seeing every moment I'm being gobbled up by the desert." So the river turned to the wind and said, "Wind, can you help me? How can I cross this desert?" And the wind said, "The only way you can cross this desert is if you let me carry you. And that means you need to surrender. You need to surrender and let me carry you over the mountains." And the river said, "Oh my, how will I do that? I mean, that's not really what rivers do. We cross the land." And the the wind said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's not the way it's going to work this time." And so after much thinking and recognizing that there was no other choice, the river said, "Okay, I'll surrender to you. And what will happen to me?" And the wind said, "I'll carry you over the mountain. And then when you're on the other side of the mountain, after you've become a cloud and you become the rain, you will fall and you will become a river again." And the river said, "Gosh, but will I be the same river? You know, this is really out of my comfort zone." And the wind said, "No, you won't, but that's your only chance." And so the river had to surrender, and it let the wind lift it up, carry it over the mountains, become huge clouds, and then thunderclouds, and then become rain. And after it rained and rained, it formed a new river and began its journey again. And I like that story. I hope you do too, because it's a story of our time. Here we are during this pandemic, and we have come to the end of everything that we know. And now the only way forward is through transformation, through being different. And of course, we don't like that. We want to be the river we've always been. And we don't trust reconstructing ourselves, recalibrating who we are. And yet, that is what life calls us to do. Time after time, year after year, we face all kinds of transitions, and we can either fight them or we can surrender and transform. So that is our choice now, I believe. And I've been asked to speak with you today about making stress your friend. So I begin with the story because at this time, it is extremely stressful for all of us. There's psychic anxiety in the air. And not only that, we have our personal stresses, our families, our concern for people who are not well, the whole COVID drama. And the American Psychological Association has recently published a report and is indicating the very high stress levels that people are experiencing, especially those who have children. And that's all understandable. So how can we transform and not get buried and not become ill or in some way chronically compromised through our innate stress and then the way it is magnified right now with COVID? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about stress, and then I'm going to share with you how I believe mindfulness and meditation can really help. Stress can help at this time, can help generally to build us up in our lives. And one of the first things I want to talk about is that, we really only have now, this present moment. And stress, a lot of stress is created by our anxiety about the future or our beating ourselves up about the past. And what we need to do is we need to wake up, slow down, and stay present to the present moment and recognize that we have other choices. There's an interesting story, and as you can tell, I like stories. There's an interesting story about a man who is knocking on his son's bedroom door. And he's saying, Jamie, wake up. You have to go to school. And he hears from behind the door Jamie answer, I'm not going to school. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I'm not going to school. It's dull, the kids tease me, and I hate school. And the father answered, and he said, Jamie, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you are going to go to school. Number 1, it's your duty. Number 2, you're 45 years old. And number 3, you're the headmaster. Jamie, wake up. And that's the story for us too. We want to hide. We want to get stuck. We want to get caught. We want to hold on to our stress, our anxiety, our worries. And we don't want to wake up to the fact that actually we have some control over them. We can change many, many things. So that's the story about us fighting our own illusions. So let's talk about that a little bit. So what is stress? Well, first of all, stress is an emotional reaction. It's a reaction, as I said, to something that's occurred in the past or something that is happening now, an acute stress, or something that we're anxious about. And a lot of our anxiety is anticipatory anxiety. We're worried about the future. We're worried about tomorrow. What if this will happen? What if that will happen? And so we are caught between these concerns, the past, the present, the future. And what we don't realize is that stress itself is a reaction, and that we can control that reaction. You know, there's a wonderful saying by Mark Twain, and he says, he wrote once, "I'm an old man, and I have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." And that's the story of many of our stresses. Not all, of course, because, of course, with COVID, there's some new stresses that have landed on many of our doors. So first of all, let's think about stress. Stress, as I said, is a reaction. Stress is an energy. It is part of our energy we're putting into reacting to something that is emotionally triggering us. Now, the important point for us to realize is that, one, once we recognize that stress is a reaction, we can take a deep breath, slow down, and start to think about what is it that we're reacting to. Now we can have a look at what are the stressors that are causing that reaction. What is making us feel so anxious? What is triggering that deep anxiety? Now, here's something that we need to bear in mind, and many of you probably know this. We are wired, internally wired, to be anxious. We're wired for fight, flight. We still have buried in our DNA, all set up in our limbic system, memories of when we were in the bush and we were concerned about whether that little bit of grass that was moving was either a lion or whether it was the wind. And so we were always in some way on the lookout for, was our survival at stake? And that is still very much embedded within us. So what we need to recognize is that we have to overcome that deep wiring. You might say that the chips are actually stacked a little against us, in that we start off with this wiring, this kind of anxiety, this disposition towards anxiety. So, of course, depending on our own makeup, it doesn't take much to take it the next level. So now we know that stress is a reaction. It's a reaction to stressors. We know that we're wired to be anxious. We're wired for fight, flight. So now we have to think about, and we have to give time to this, to consider what are those stressors? What are making us, feel so anxious? What is it that's really upping our heartbeat, that is causing our adrenaline to flow, our cortisol to pour through our system? And unfortunately, particularly during this very anxious time, we're at some kind of chronic stress level anyway, So our poor bodies are absorbing this adrenaline, this cortisol, leaking into our system many hours of the day. So let's look at some of the stressors that concern most of us. We don't like to be out of control. We don't like our identity to be challenged. We fear uncertainty. We worry about whether we'll be good enough. We're concerned, will we be perfect? Will we get everything done on time, in the right way? We're worried about what will the future look like? And how will we prepare ourselves for the future? We're buried in an enormous number of what if this, what if that, what if something else? And so we fill our minds up with all of these stressors. And of course they build. And then what we're inclined to do is, because they create this kind of internal pressure, we want to distract ourselves as much as possible. So we get on that computer and we hammer out those emails. We work long, long hours, try to do everything we used to do and more. And I know for many women, particularly, who are looking after children, you have that added concern of school, homeschooling, picking them up, daycare, getting food into the house. That is enormous. And it is no wonder that we have all these stresses. So what can we do? How can we make stress, instead of our enemy, our friend? Now, the Buddhists have a saying that the only way to remove a thorn is with a thorn. Another way to look at it is that the only way to counter a poison is with an antidote that includes some of that poison. And we're learning that about the vaccine too. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that it is our mind that gets us into a lot of trouble. Our mind that is racing all the time, trying to protect us. Our ego, that is our anxiety management system, that is on hyper alert and is looking out all the time for how to make things right, how to get us back into control, how to bring back the normal. And you see, we forget, like the river, we cannot go back. There is no bringing back of the normal we used to know. This is a time when we will be creating a new normal. But it's a little unnerving because we're in between the old and the new. And we've got somehow one foot in the old and one foot sort of dangling in the air, hoping for the new. And it's in this liminal time that all the other stresses, as I said, become magnified. Now, what we need to recognize is that we need to surrender a little bit, and that this is really a time of transformation. And like Jamie, We need to drop some of our illusions of control, our illusions that everything can be made right again, and wake up. Wake up to what? Wake up to the present moment. So let me say more about that. How can we make stress our friend instead of our enemy? How can we remove a thorn with a thorn? Now, as I said, it's our minds that get us into a lot of trouble. And so it's our minds that are going to help us get out of that trouble. And the first way is through mindfulness. Now, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is about directing our attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally. It's about developing a presence. It's about being present to the present. It's about bracketing out the past, bracketing out the future, and dealing just with now. So mindfulness is number one, slowing down. Slow down. Instead, what we're trying to do with our stress and our anxiety and our need to get everything done and prove we can do it all, we're speeding up. Even though we may not be sitting on the highways as much, we're doing it at home. We're doing it in our heads. We're doing it in our bodies. So the first thing is slow down. The second thing is that to remember the greatest friend that we have, the one that will be with us right till the very end, is ourselves. Ourselves. And that includes our bodies. We happen to think that our bodies are our vehicles to carry us around, to sort of get our heads, our egos from here to there. And we forget that we really are our bodies. They're not these vehicles that from time to time, it's like you go for a maintenance checkup to the doctor and you hope like crazy that there's no problem and that you don't have to pay too much. It's just a normal tune-up. And when there's a problem, we kind of kick the tires and we're a little angry with ourselves, our poor bodies. But our bodies are our greatest friends. We just don't treat them that nicely. We expect them to do everything. And we talk about the body as if it's something that's not us. But it is us. And it's our body that holds everything. Our hopes, our fears, our stress, our anxiety, our passion, our love. Everything is held in our body. So how are we going to make stress our friend? First of all, we're going to slow down. Then we're going to be present. We're going to try not to keep letting this future, which of course never arrives because we only live in the present. The future is a, fantasy of the mind, if you like. We're going to stay in the present and deal with what's really here now. And we're going to deal with it by being present to the outer world, i.e., whoever we're dealing with, whatever we're engaged in, and with our inner world. How do we feel? How do we feel in our bodies? So we're going to be present. And then what we're going to try to do is we're going to acknowledge our stressors. Remember, we're going to befriend these stressors. So we need to give them a little time. Instead, we get all excited and say, I'm stressed, I'm worried about this, worried about that. And we don't actually give our stressors time to recognize and acknowledge what is it that we're really stressed about. So I'll give you, a banal example. I live in Massachusetts, and I used to spend a lot of time on Route 128. Now, if any of you know Route 128, it is a crazy highway. And I think it's getting crazier, but that's beside the point. So I used to roar up and down Route 128 along with thousands of other cars, often in peak hour traffic. And I would be getting into the car and I'd had my nice breakfast and I would be saying to myself, okay, I've got a reasonable day ahead. I've got some meetings with people I appreciate. And no sooner would I be on Route 128 and somebody would cut me off, and suddenly around the corner, the cars would be slowed down. Now, even though I'd prided myself that I'd given myself an extra half an hour, within seconds, my blood pressure's on the ceiling, I'm worried, I'm angry, I'm worked up. Why are the cars so slow? I'm going to be late for my meeting. This wasn't the way it was supposed to do. What will my clients think? On and on and on. So within seconds, I am no longer at peace with myself. And that was all my mind. That was all I just let the stress take over. So now, what is the stressor in that situation? My reaction was stress. The stressor was that I was going to be late for my client. But what was the real stressor? The real stressor is that I was thinking, what will they think of me? How can a consultant be late? Especially since the appointment was made over a week ago, especially since she travels on 128 and she knows what a madhouse it is. Why didn't she cater for that? All these things flash through my mind. So the stressor always goes back to the ego, how I feel about myself. I feel that I'm not a good consultant, that they will think less of me, that they will think I can't organize my time well. So that's what I need to think about. It's okay, Annabel. So that's what really triggers you. And you see, with mindfulness, we always acknowledge what is. We don't try to deflect, detract. We look at what is true. And the interesting thing is, the more we look at what is true, and we think it's very difficult, actually the easier it becomes, and the more we learn about ourselves. And it's that learning about ourselves that gives us a lot of inner strength. And so now I have turned my stressor from an unknown enemy that I hate Route 128 because it makes me stressed, to a very different way of looking at it. I, Annabel, get stressed when I don't think I'm the perfect consultant. Now let me look at that. And that's what mindfulness asks us to do, is to slow down non-judgmentally. So this is not about, oh my gosh, aren't I a terrible person, you know, another opportunity to be a martyr and self-flagellate. No, this is a time to just, in those moments, connect with my deeper self and say, okay, now I know that's stressful. Now my next thing is, once I know that, I say, how can I take care of it? Not, how can I get rid of it? Isn't it terrible? Look at me, I should be better. None of that. How can I take care of myself? So that's what mindfulness, one aspect of that we're talking about today, is how can I slow down, stay present to what is really happening now, and not allow myself to be bombarded with what ifs. How can I acknowledge and recognize what is happening now and really look deeply into it with unconditional acceptance? And then how can I take care of it? And that is what we want to do with mindfulness. And by being present to myself, I start to connect to myself in a much deeper way. Now, let me add one more thing, is that mindfulness has a very important partner, and it's called meditation. And what is meditation? Now, here is a fallacy. Many people think that meditation is something one has to do. Meditation is a non-doing. If you like, meditation is a form of vegging. When you come home or when you're at home, and at the end of the day, you've worked, you've taken care of, I don't know, your parents, your children, your partner. The food's almost cooked, or maybe it isn't, and you say, I've just got to veg. What are you really saying? You're saying, I just need to grow. I just need some time, some space. I need to vegetate. I need to be like the nature. Just be. And you know what? That's meditation. It's a form of vegging. So meditation is a non-doing. It is a sitting quietly. And the key thing is to have your back straight. And of course, many people have all kinds of rules, and we don't need to worry about rules. It's just mostly to have your back straight so that you can breathe, and so that the energy can go up and down your spine, and that you can be very quietly with yourself. And in meditation, you just sit and connect with the inner you, the you that is behind everything, the you that is the core you, the you that isn't the stress, that isn't the pain, that isn't the anxiety, the you that is the very essence of who you are. And in those quiet moments, you breathe deeply, you drop into your body, and you give yourself, your whole self, body, mind, and soul. You give them attention, just quietly, very gently. Just connect with yourself. And those quiet, gentle moments, sometimes the thoughts will come flashing by about your boss who didn't thank you, and the teacher who didn't help your children, and I don't know, all kinds of things. And as you sit quietly, you realize that those are like clouds passing through the sky. That everything that we worry about today will not be here tomorrow. And if it is, it will be different. Nothing is the same. Everything changes. And so you can watch the clouds of your thoughts drift by as you quietly sit and connect with yourself. And meditation has enormous benefits for us. In fact, when you read about mindfulness and meditation and all the neuroscience reports and everything, it is that quiet, deep connection, 5 or 10 minutes a day, where you listen to your inner song, your inner melody, when you listen to your own life speaking. When you just connect and form a relationship with yourself. When you pay attention to your body and feel where you're holding that stress. Is it your stomach? Is it your chest? Is it your throat? And you give it gentle attention. That time is enormously beneficial. And that now the ancients have known for thousands and thousands of years. There is nothing to beat quiet contemplation, quiet meditation. And the thing is, it's so sad. We say, I don't have time to be quiet. And how can we not have time to connect with ourselves? And you know, our bodies, our inner selves, are our greatest and deepest friends. And by being with them, by being with our inner self, by being with our body, by giving it attention, we recognize that the stress is not only something that may be the mind imposed, but is sitting in our bodies, and that we can actually, through deep breathing, through quietness, through relaxation, we can change our physiology. And not only that, we can re-channel the neuropods in our minds. So just 5-10 minutes a day changes everything. It slows us down, it gives us perspective, and it builds our inner resilience. And we need that inner resilience because that constant leaking of the adrenaline and the cortisol is impacting our immune system. But with meditation, as we quieten everything down, we build our inner resources. So I can't say enough about how we can strengthen ourselves, particularly at this difficult time, this challenging time, how we can turn to our own inner resources, rechannel the energy of stress, reframe our minds, live in the present moment. Be more present to ourselves and therefore to others. And I want to stress that through this slowing down and this pacing, we will be so much more effective and so much more efficient. And believe it or not, we will get so much more done. So I really hope that this is something you will consider, is to make mindfulness and meditation a part of your life, a part of the transformation. And some of you may be doing this already. And so maybe this is just a reminder of how good this is and how helpful this is. And maybe I could tell you a story. It's an African story. I come from Africa, as you know. And it's a story a long time ago. There was this leader of an African tribe, and he was a good man. And he died, and his two children were very distressed. They were very sad that he died. He seemed to have died prematurely. He was rather young. And so they were sitting by the campfire, and the two of them were talking about their father. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, he appeared in front of them. And they thought, oh my gosh, this is a ghost. And he said, no, this is me. I'm here. He said, come with me. So they thought, well, okay, it's not a ghost. This is our father. We'll go with you. And so he took them, and they followed him in the dark. And he went into what seemed like a tunnel. And they went underground, and they walked and walked and walked and walked. And they kind of lost their bearings of where they were. And suddenly they came to a clearing. And the father said, I would like you to sit and wait here. And so the two of them, of course, were not only enthralled to be with their father, trying to figure all of this out, but they said, okay, and they went down on their haunches and they sat there. And so at dawn, because they had walked through the night, all of a sudden, there was a crowd of people that came into the clearing. And they were carrying something. And of course, the two children were wondering what this was. And they carried this something and put it in the middle of the clearing. And what the children could sort of figure out of this weird figure, what a blob, whatever it was, it looked like a person. And the person was covered with maggots. You know what maggots are? Little things that eat away. But maggots are very, very helpful. They clean away the dirt. They clean away everything that's old and dying. We don't like maggots, but they actually have a phenomenal function. And the children were horrified as they watched the maggots. And the maggots sort of were there for a couple of hours. And all of a sudden they fled, these maggots did, into the bush away from the clearing. And the people came back again. And they began to polish this figure that had been buried with maggots. And as they polished the figure, what emerged is that it was pure gold. And as they polished it, this figure began to unfurl and stood up and was a beautiful tribal leader in full gold. Sort of gold painted, if you liked, but gold, they couldn't figure it. And all the people were polishing this leader. And the leader shone and shone and shone. And the more it shone, the more of its brilliance. And the people were so happy. And they clapped and clapped and clapped. And the leader started to move and shook his arms. And people started to chant. And everybody was enthralled. And the day was spent in a great deal of celebration. And the two children were watching this, trying to figure what all of this, how to make sense of this. And the night fell again, and the father returned, and he said, I would like you to stay one more night. So they agreed, and they huddled together till the dawn, and the very same thing happened. In the evening, the leader had left the clearing. I should have mentioned that, sorry. And then in the dawn, same thing happened. This figure was carried into the clearing, full of maggots. The villagers disappeared, or the people disappeared. After the maggots worked on it for a few hours, people came back and started to polish the leader with gold. It's a very strange story, isn't it? Anyhow, at the end of this, the father came to the two children and he said, what did you notice? And they said, we can't really understand this, but we see 1 minute everything is full of maggots, the next minute it's polished with gold. And the father said, he said, I want you to go back now, and I am going to stay here. But I want you to remember that that is what life is about. There are times of maggots and times of gold. And the big thing for all of us is, how do we live through those times? What do we make of the times that are maggots? And what do we make of the times of gold? And how can we turn the time of maggots into a time that doesn't take us down and make us feel the darkness and the sort of, the dislike of the time of maggots, but to recognize that there's always the transition to the time of gold. And that is what mindfulness and meditation can help us with, is to understand that life is continuous transition. Good time, not so good time, time when we come to the end of the desert, time of maggots, time of gold. And how can we strengthen ourselves from within so that we don't yo-yo back and forth between I'm so happy, I'm so sad, it's a good time, it's a bad time, it's But how can we hold steady inside? Slow down. Breathe. Connect with our inner selves. Find perspective. Get kind of balance, even keel. And remember that every night has a dawn. Every tide turns. And the lowest ebb is the turn of the tide. So I'm hoping some of these stories, some of these ideas will be helpful to you during this time, during all times, and that maybe by slowing down, connecting with yourself, remembering so many things are made up by our minds, and that we can always remind ourselves that this too will pass, and that we are here, and that we have enormous inner resources and resilience. And I am going to end it there and hope that some of these thoughts will be helpful to you.
Thank you, Annabel, so much. That was amazing. I found myself closing my eyes as you were telling some of your stories and just really taking in what you had to say. It was wonderful. Thank you for those words of wisdom. Your stories definitely resonated with me, as I'm sure they will with everybody else. We do have some time for questions and answers. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Annabel, feel free to type it in the chat box. And if you want to come on camera, let us know too, and I'll turn your camera on and you can ask her personally. Feel free to type in. Yeah, someone did type in the chat box that your cadence was so relaxing. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, I agree. Could listen to her all day long. The path you took us on, thanks, Jane. I agree with that. Yeah, it just did it from start to finish. It was wonderful. Feel free to type in anything that you if you do have a question for Annabel, feel free. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that we did record this session, and the New Hampshire Tech Alliance does have a YouTube channel now. So Josh will be posting that, at some point over the next few days, I'm sure. So you can reference this again in the future, because like everybody said, just listening to Annabel is wonderful. So you can revisit this again or share it with friends. If we don't have any questions, someone is answering a question right now. So Annabel, someone said, I missed the opening of the presentation, but they're wondering what brought Annabel to her professional pathway to embrace and assist others with mindfulness. That's an interesting question because, Annabel, you are a technologist. You had your own AI business that you founded. It was very successful international business. So it is interesting, which is why it was so important for me to do a snapshot of your bio in the beginning, because you go from a technologist to mindfulness. So yeah, could you share that?
Sure. My AI business was in England, and prior to that, London, was out of London. And prior to that, I was in investment banking, which was even more crazy making, if you like. And I really loved the AI work. However, what I found is that I was losing my soul. It was really quite interesting. I was working very hard, flying around the world at the time. And even though it was very intellectually stimulating, talking about stress, it was very stressful because you're in technology, and so many of you know this, and I know this. I know what what it is like to deliver systems, and the systems don't work, and the clients want the systems, and you've got all these deliverables, and then your key software person is out for 3 days, and oh, I've been through it all, and I've been through the working through the night, and the systems that don't harmonize. Yeah, we could have many AI stories. Anyhow, to keep this succinct, I realized not only was I physically depleted, but I was emotionally depleted, and my soul was knocking at my door. And it was really, I'm going to give you the short version of it, believe it or not. I had a wonderful executive assistant, and she said, Annabel, you cannot keep up this pace. You need to take a break. And she literally pushed me onto a jumbo jet from London to Boston. And I came to Boston to investigate courses. I said to myself, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to do some liberal art courses, because I'd never done that. I'd always done my CPA and my business law and everything. And I arrived here on the shores of Boston, and I wandered around, and I went to the various colleges, Boston College, and so on and so forth. And I recognize, as I said to you, I recognized that I really needed to do something. I had the ulcer, all the trappings of success, if you like. And I sat in on a class at the Western Jesuit School of Theology. And the guy in the class, he was a priest, a wonderful man. He came up to me and he told everybody, I was a visitor, I was invited as a guest. And he told everybody, here is someone from across the pond and a guest, very welcome, blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, do you have your Bible? And of course I looked at him and I said, no, but I have my calculator. And of course that brought a roar of laughter, but that didn't help. So he handed me the Bible. And they were studying at the time, I don't know, for those of you who know the Christian tradition, they were studying the Gospel of Mark. And he said, okay, class, we're going to pick up where we left last time. And he began to read. And what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul? For what can man offer in return for his soul? And as he read that, and we'll bracket out the man piece because that's the way it is, he looked right at me. And that was one of the most transformative events in my life. It was as if it was the inner and the outer world speaking to one another. And that was the turning point. So I won't take up more of your time to tell you then the many twists and winds and turns that it's taken. But I will say that and that was, let's see, 1993, 27 years ago. I will say that our inner and outer worlds are talking to us all the time. We just don't hear it. And we don't find the time to make that connection. And so I will just say one of the most challenging things I found was meeting myself. When I left London and I sold my business and came to study full-time in Boston, the first person to meet me was myself. And that was a shock, because it was a self that had no AI company. I couldn't talk about my BMW. I couldn't talk about my house. I couldn't talk about my staff. Who was I then? What was I? What was the source of my identity and my self-esteem? And therein was many a journey. Not all of it fun, but very worthwhile.
Thank you, Annabelle, for sharing. And it is 9 o'clock on the nose, so I know some people need to scurry off for their day, and hopefully with all your sentiments and stories, their day will be much more productive and they'll be mindful throughout their day. I appreciate that. For those of you who can stay after, like I said, we're keeping the room open till 9:30. So if Annabelle has a couple extra minutes, she could be over at table 1 if you'd like to chat with her. I know we had a couple other comments in the box that we don't have time to get to right at the moment. I did want to say that, again, thank you. Hopefully we accomplished our mission by coming together to inspire and be inspired and show people what possibilities are out there for you. As you could see, Annabelle had a journey with her career from a technologist to captivating us today. Next month in January, we're going to be meeting again on the same platform. Barbara McKetty will be joining us. That's January 13th. And we're going to continue doing remote until who knows when. Hopefully by spring we'll be meeting in person again. But thank you again, Annabelle. Thank you again for everybody for joining us. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Enjoy your holidays, everybody. And be well. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Annabelle.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much.